we should understand that even though there was Jim Crow only came after the first few years after the Civil War. Jim Crow only came after the Reconstruction period. Jim Crow came after Africans had been liberated or had liberated themselves from slavery and had come out into and had become the majority of the legislature in Louisiana, in Mississippi, in South Carolina, in public schools which did not exist in these places began to become existent because black legislators voted for education, whereas white racist advocates of the plantation system who were in those positions before them had never seen fit to put in public education for the Africans or for the whites. Only people of means could go to school. And so it was our people who built those schools. How do you take children from the schools that their ancestors built and call yourself civilized? It reminds you of, I don't know if it was Thoreau or some fella who made the statement. They asked him, what do you think about Western civilization? And he said, I think it would be a good idea, right? This is cruel. This is cruel. They talk about people who kill dogs. In one breath, and then in the next breath tell you that the dogs that that person killed, they are about to put to sleep themselves, right? Because there's too many of them, they have no worthwhile purpose, and there's not enough masters for these dogs. Not enough good people to take care of these dogs and act like they love dogs. It is good to have this court, because in this court, we are not shackled by the boundaries of imperialism and years of imperialistic culture, which is really not culture at all. Imperialism actually brings you not culture, but the anti-culture. And we are not shackled by those notions. And so we can look and we can seek the truth. We can find truth where we see it, and we can speak truth where we find it. It is important to note that in their testimony, Brother Daniel and Brother from Honduras, Brother Dennis, suggests some of the solutions that we must create to these problems with the help of this tribunal. What they say is that brother from Honduras, Brother Dennis, tells us that it was an African-American group, as he called it, quote unquote, that bailed him out of jail. Brother Daniel says that we must come together and we must stop this manipulation, this sinful and evil pattern of behavior which divides us and brings ourselves together. We must destroy the new slavery, and this court must look at Group 1 violations, gross violations of human rights, to be free from racial discrimination, including discrimination based upon perceived immigration status. Group 2 violations, including violations of human rights to return, to resettle, and to reintegrate, which is obviously something that cannot happen as long as people are brought in as new slaves and you do not have the opportunity to work in the hotel that you're only allowed to stay in because FEMA's going to pay the bill for a few days and then put you out in the street. The right to work in Group 6 the right to adequate housing. Group 7, not only for the Latinos, but also for the Africans. Number 7, the violation of human right to adequate standard of living and freedom from poverty for both the Latino and for the Africans. We are told in the testimony brought by Counsel Christian Cook and Juan Lafanta, State Representative. He tells us the racial composition of his district, and if I am not mistaken, you can check your facts, prior to Katrina was 70%, 30% after Katrina. He says 400 people die of a month, many of broken hearts, psychological pressure, proud people, angry with the right, and according to Tony S., they are not only angry, but they have the right to be angry. And like Tony S. says, he says they not only have the right to be angry, but they have the right to take over. Scare tactics were used to scare voters away from the polls, threaten them with criminal prosecution. If they vote somewhere else and vote in New Orleans, they say, then you will be guilty of a crime. The mail too slow for absentee ballots, yet they expect them to vote. They refuse to give them satellite voting, and do you imagine that? They have people that they have sent to Iraq and Iran that they allow into Afghanistan, and the United States has bases all over the world, everywhere. Here's this country, here's this state, this imperialist empire that claims to be protecting the world from people trying to take over the world, yet they're the only one that has taken over the world. But what they do is they allow, as long as they're on their plane, on their ship, under their control, under their mental manipulation, you can have satellite voting in these places. You can even, if you're voting for the puppet government in Iraq, you can be in Detroit, Michigan, and be an Iraqi and vote for the puppet government in Iraq with the facilitation of the United States in satellite voting stations. Yet you can't live in Jackson, Mississippi and satellite vote in New Orleans if you're an internally displaced person and when you have a right to, according to the international covenants. Roderick Dean ran for election and realized that he was hurt in his election because of the fact that they moved polling places, and in some places they didn't have machines that worked, and there was all kinds of dysfunctions in the polling place. We know about that a little bit. We've heard about that. This here again is not new behavior. This goes back to the Chinese test during voting. It is more recently recalled in the way that they disengaged and able to disenfranchise Africans in Ohio, and before that in Florida, as Bush stole the election there. Number 8 of our group of charges say violation of human rights to vote, electoral rights, and right to participate in governance. Tony S. talked about the indigenous population. Katrina was worse than the 9. Tony S. is an expert in working with disaster relief. And he says Katrina was the worst disaster than 9/11, worse than 9/11. Yet 9/11 gets more aid, more corporations, more government attention.